Woman's Mysteries, Ancient and Modern by M. Esther Harding. Chapter 3, Moon in Modern Life. To ancient and primitive man, the moon was the visible representative of womanhood. The ancients naturally did not understand the nature of the power which they revered in the moon, but we realize that to them it stood as a symbol of the very essence of woman in its contrast to the essence of man. In the myths and customs outlined in the following chapters are set forth in shadowy form the feeling, the reaction which men and women had, not towards a particular woman, not even towards women in general, but the feminineness itself, to the feminine principle which was and is, in spite of the feminist movement and the masculinization of modern women, the mainspring of woman, controlling both her physical and her inner psychological being. The same feminine principle, or eros, functions in man as well as in woman. But while in woman her conscious personality is under the guidance of this principle, in man it is not his conscious but his unconscious that is related to the eros. His conscious personality, being masculine, is under the masculine rule of logos. In the unconscious, however, he is given over to the other side. There, his soul, which mankind has consistently regarded as feminine, rules. This feminine soul of man is the anima. The nature of his anima and his relation to her determine the nature of his relations to women and also his own inner relations to that spiritual realm over which his anima rules. A discussion of the nature of the feminine principle and the laws which govern it is of vital importance to both men and women today, for, as we have seen, in our Western 20th century culture, this principle has been neglected and its requirements have been met only by a stereotype and mechanical observance of conventional customs, while the care and tendance of the life-giving springs which lie hidden in the depths of nature have been disregarded. For these sources of spiritual or psychological energy can only be reached, or so the myths and ancient religions say, through a right approach to the feminine essence of nature, whether this functions in animate form or in women themselves. It is therefore of the greatest importance that we seek to establish once more a better relation to the feminine principle. In facing this subject, we have to disabuse ourselves of all preconceived ideas of what woman is like, or of what is the truly womanly, and approach it with an open mind. Our civilization has been patriarchal for so long, the masculine element predominating, that our conception of what feminine is in itself is likely to be prejudiced. For instance, it has become an established fact among us that masculine is strong and superior and feminine weak and inferior. Only in recent times has this dogma been challenged by the revolt of women who have not only questioned the theory but have also demonstrated in practice that it does not hold water. But the preconception still persists that men are in some peculiar way not dependent on personal achievement or character or strength superior to women, that men qua man is superior to woman as such. In matriarchal societies, the reverse of this assumption is held to be true. Pure matriarchal societies are very rare today, but there are still in existence a good many societies where the underlying mother rule still persists, although men have risen to an apparent power. Among the Dobus of Melanesia, for instance, the clan is formed by a relationship through the mother. It is a clan of women and their related males. The husband has no place in it. His presence in the village is tolerated during his wife's lifetime, but if she should die, he has to return to his mother's village, where he comes under the rule not of his father, but of his mother's brother. The rise of masculine power and of patriarchal society probably started when man began to accumulate personal as over against communal property, and found that his personal strength and prowess could increase his personal possessions. This change in secular power coincided with the rise of the sun worship under a male priesthood, which began to supersede the much earlier moon cults, which, however, remained in the hands of the women. Sun worship was usually introduced and established by an edict of military dictator, as happened in Babylon and Egypt, and probably in other countries as well. The result of this change in emphasis between masculine and feminine were far-reaching. Perhaps one of the most important was that the concept of what constituted religious or spiritual values, which had been symbolized by the moon, was transferred to the sun and came under masculine control. In the days of moon worship, religion was concerned with the unseen powers of the spirit world, and even when the state religion was transferred to the sun, a god of war, of personal aggrandizement, and of the things of this world, the spiritual qualities remained with the moon deities. For the worship of the moon is the worship of the creative and fecund powers of nature and of the wisdom that lies inherent in instinct and in the at oneness with natural law. But the worship of the sun is the worship of that which overcomes nature, which orders her chaotic fullness and harnesses her power to the fulfilling of man's ends. The masculine principle, or logos, thus came to be revered in the person of the sun god and the godlike qualities inherent in man. His capacity to achieve and to order, to formulate, discriminate, and generalize were venerated in a sun hero who undertook his 12 labors and slew the dragons of ignorance and sloth, thus acquiring consciousness, a spiritual value of a different color. Our modern 20th century attitude is the result of this shift in emphasis from the values symbolized by the moon to those represented by the sun. It has resulted in a conviction that intellect is the greatest spiritual power, in that everything could be ordered rightly if only people would use their intelligence. The majority of people even believe that the difficulties of our present-day world could be solved simply by the right application of economic laws or by some other rational system, and that people can be made good by some educational technique. We hold, in fact, that God is intelligence and that he is incarnate in man's rational intellect. Needless to say, this concept has left out of count the non-human creative power of the masculine principle, the logos, which is its truly divine aspect, but such are the sterile days upon which our concept of the divine have fallen. Yet to many thinking men and women doubts have occurred. If intellect is the supreme power, why are things in the world apparently so much worse than they were a while ago? Why does the millennium recede even further into the distance as man increasingly seeks to control natural phenomena? There are not wanting critics who say that conditions are too complex for man's intelligence to cope with, and that less misery and unfairness occurred under nature's ruthless yea and nay than under any humanly devised code. Side by side with the optimism of those who pin their faith to an increased rational control of nature is to be seen a profound disbelief in the very principles on which our system rests. The revolt from the ordered and rational is evident, not only in political and social movements, but more significantly still in the realm of art. In literature, as well as in the plastic arts, the established laws of aesthetics are often discarded in order that the images which rise spontaneously from the unconscious may be allowed to express themselves freely. The art products which result may be bizarre or incomprehensible and, judged from the standpoint of the rational intellect, meaningless or even pathological or debased, but that they are living, energized, replete with unknown meaning is proved by the fascination they have for such large numbers of people. In his essays on Picasso and the Ulysses of Joyce, Jung has discussed two such art creations and has shown how these works also follow a law, but not the law of reason, the masculine logos. Instead, they turn aside from the rational and the consciously controlled and go by the path of the left, which leads down to darkness, into the primordial slime from which life first emerged. In these depths are the dark, sinister feminine beginnings, in a region ruled over not by the bright logos of intellect, but by the dark eros of the feelings. The chaotic strivings of these modern artists were hampered by the struggle against the medieval orderedness which has continued to envelop us. To use Jung's expression, up to the ears. The laws of the new realm which they were seeking to explore did not manifest themselves in their works in any free or undistorted fashion, because they are still fighting against the authority of the old. Yet if we are to profit by the turn in the tide of events whose movement has gained such rapid speed during the last half-century, it is essential that we should learn the nature of these laws. In the religions of the moon deity, this was the spirit that was recognized as the supreme power and worshipped as such. Here the laws of the feminine principle were formulated and rituals were prescribed which aimed to put man into a right relation to a power recognized as beyond human control. The material of the myths and religions whose interpretation we are about to consider is religious material. It has to do not with adaptations to outer objects and circumstances, but with inner, spiritual, or psychic attitudes. Spiritual attitudes naturally show themselves in the kind of adaptation which an individual makes in his ordinary life, but that is a secondary effect and not the primary object of a religious ritual or observance. So when we consider the feminine principle or eros and the demands which an adequate relation to it make upon the individual, we shall not expect to find a rule of etiquette or conventional good behavior. Indeed, one effect of the prestige in which the masculine order has been held among us is that the feminine side of life has come to be regarded in a sentimental way. while the rules of feeling have been entirely routinized into a conventional form which has further stifled the already repressed feminine. The characteristics which are generally considered womanly, the undiscriminating kindliness, the general or even universal charm, the yea saying are by no means necessarily evidence of a developed relation to the eros. The eros is a spiritual or psychological principle, or in the older term, it is a divinity. To be related to this principle means to be oriented to that which transcends personal aims and ambitions. It means gaining a relation to a non-personal value, just as to become related to the logos means acquiring a relation to non-personal truth. Submission to either principle, in fact, implies that one is redeemed from a personal or ego orientation and from the desire for personal power and gives one's allegiance to that which is beyond the personal. It is this that is the religious attitude. In nature, the feminine principle, or as naive man would say, the feminine goddess, shows itself as blind force, fecund and cruel, creating, cherishing, and destroying. It is the female of the species, more deadly than the male, fierce in its loves as in its hate. This is the feminine principle in its demonic form. The Chinese call it yin, the shadowy power of the female. Just as in Babylon, Arabia, and the Near East, every earth goddess is also a moon goddess, so to the Chinese, yin is both earth and moon. Wilhelm writes, the yin principle is everything dark, shady, cool, feminine, and this power commences its power in the autumn. The power which begins in the autumn to overcome the sun is the cold and the dark of winter. That it is which the Chinese consider the essence of the female principle, the great yin, symbolized by the tiger gliding stealthily through the grass, waiting to leap upon its prey with claws and fangs, yet looking all the while sleek, gentle, and cat-like, making one almost forget its ferocity. This feminine power was named eros by the Greeks. It signified relatedness rather than love, for in the idea of eros, negative or hate is comprised as well as positive or love. The ambivalent and potent character of the feminine principle is an ever-present psychological reality to men. To them, women seemingly partake of its demonic power, though many men are unaware of this fact. But the almost universal fear that men have of falling under the power or fascination of a woman and the attraction that this same bondage has for them are evidences that the effect of a woman produces on a man is not infrequently demonic in character. The depreciatory attitude which many a man takes towards women is an unconscious attempt to control a situation in which he feels himself at a disadvantage, or he seeks to undercut the dreaded power of the woman by inducing her to act towards him as a mother. In this way, he is released in large measure from his fear, and for in his relation to his mother, nearly every man has experienced the positive aspect of woman's love. Even so, he is not entirely free from apprehension, because in making the woman mother he, at the same time, makes himself child, and is thus in danger of falling into his own childishness. If this happens, he may be overcome by his own weakness, which once more leaves the woman all-powerful in the situation. Consequently, for the most part, a man approaches a woman with fear, albeit unconscious fear, or with hostility born of fear, or perhaps with a dominant attitude that is intended to overcome her at a stroke. The image of woman as demonic is not due, as a rule, to any experience the man has had with a particular woman, although his experience may confirm his unconscious presupposition. It depends rather on a universal assumption which rests on the nature of the man's own anima, or feminine soul, his inner image of the feminine. For the anima is not a woman, but a feminine nature spirit, which reflects the characteristics of the demonic, non-human moon goddess, and gives to man a direct experience of the non-human eros in all its power, both glorious and terrible. In ordinary life, a man does not contact the hard, predatory, implacable, masculine principle directly, but meets it in human guise, mediated by a superior function, disciplined thinking, or trained physical strength. But the feminine within himself is not mediated through a cultured and developed human personality. The feminine principle, the moon goddess, acts upon him directly from the unconscious, approaching him intimately, like a traitor from within. Small wonder if he dreads and distrusts it. With the woman, the situation is somewhat different. She usually does not experience the feminine principle directly in its demonic form, for it is mediated to her through her own womanhood and her own developed feeling approach to life. But if she will stop long enough to look within, she also may become aware of impulses and thoughts which are not in accord with her conscious attitudes, but are the direct outcome of the crude and untamed feminine being within her. For the most part, however, a woman will not look at these dark secrets of her own nature. It is too painful, too undermining of the conscious character which she has built up for herself. She prefers to think that she really is as she appears to be, and indeed, it is her task to stand between the eros which is within her and the world without, and through her own womanly adaptation to the world to make human, as it were, the demonic power of the non-human feminine principle. In our Western civilization, we have separated ourselves so far from the more instinctive aspects of the eros, and have domesticated the superficial part of it so highly that in her eros attitude to the world, in her social and domestic relations, that is, the woman's way has become completely organized and conventionalized, with the results that not only are these social and domestic relationships frequently rendered stale and infertile, but the woman herself suffers from being cut off from the springs of life in the depths of her own being. When a man and woman seek to form a relationship more intimate than a merely conventional acquaintance, great differences in their points of view and in the relative values which they assign to life become apparent. These discrepancies in their attitudes are dependent on the fact that the psychic constitution of men and women are essentially different. They are the mirror opposites of one of the other. That which to the man is spiritual, good, to be sought after, is to the woman demonic, powerful, and destructive, and vice versa, so that their essential nature and values are diametrically opposed. Yet, because their natures are complementary, men and women have an inescapable need of each other and are compelled to attempt to make mutual relationships. So great, however, is the divergence of their aims that conflict between them inevitably arises whenever they come into close association. This conflict may at times seem utterly irreconcilable, and the burden which their need for each other imposes may become intolerable. The conventional way of handling this age-long problem is to remain as unconscious as possible of the deeper subjective effects of contact with the other sex, allowing nature and instinct to care for the intimate side of the association, while masking the real nature of the psychological relationship with a veneer of politeness. In recent years, as the authority of this conventional way of handling the problem of the man-woman relationship has been gradually undermined, the real conflict between them has blazed up into social conflagration of no small extent, and now it is almost as common for a marriage to end disastrously as for it to go its way on the conventional path of the so-called happy marriage, where all too often tolerance and unconsciousness act as soporifics, deadening more active discontent. This external conflict between men and women is, however, but a picture of a subjective conflict of even greater prevalence, which is perused within each individual, although perhaps without his conscious awareness. For no individual is entirely male or entirely female. Each is made up of a composite of both elements, and these two constituents are not infrequently in constant conflict within the psyche. Until this personal aspect of the problem is resolved, the individual man or woman will not be able to find a solution of the external difficulties in his relationships, for he will inevitably project the less conscious, less disciplined part of his own psyche upon his partner. The man, for instance, will encounter his own undomesticated feminine elements in his relation to his wife, and will see all that she is and all she does through the mists of his own unredeemed and demonic anima. Her motives will be distorted in his view, and her actions misunderstood. Sometimes the distortion may make her seem cruel, hostile, or crafty. At others, on account of the same distortion, he may impute to her kindness, understanding, and tolerance, which are no less untrue and deceptive. He is, indeed, incapable of seeing her clearly because he does not see himself, either fully or truly. Until he does so, and can come to terms with the other side of himself, he cannot have any true or genuine relation with a woman. But to do this means facing an inner conflict, which may well prove to be a very painful experience. Yet the problem is not solved, either by being ignored or by projecting the unacceptable factor to the other sex. If man is to be whole, he must face his unwholeness squarely. His inner conflict will only be resolved when he has found a relation to both aspects of himself and is reconciled with those ruling powers of the psyche, the masculine and feminine principles which are inherent in the very nature of every individual. In the symbolism we are about to consider, and which seems to be practically universal, the feminine principle, or eros, is represented by the moon, and the masculine principle, or logos, by the sun. As the creation myth in Genesis states, God created two lights, the greater light to rule the day and the lesser light to rule the night. The sun, as masculine principle, is ruler of the day, of consciousness, of work and achievement, and of conscious understanding and discrimination, the logos. The moon, the feminine principle, is ruler of the night, of the unconscious. She is goddess of love, controller of those mysterious forces beyond human understanding, which attract certain human beings irresistibly to each other, or as unaccountably force them apart. She is the Eros, powerful and fateful and incomprehensible. In the myths and religions relating to the moon is to be found a mine of information about the nature of the Eros and the laws which govern its functioning. These accumulations represent the wisdom of antique and primitive men who are nearer to nature than ourselves. They may hold treasures of understanding for us, or, on the other hand, they may be merely archaeological curiosities. We cannot take them uncritically as representing a wisdom appropriate for us, as well as for the ancients, but neither can we discard them as valueless merely because they are old. The fact that the symbolisms of the moon, which were evolved by widely separate people in so many ages, correspond so closely with each other is evidence that they sprang from the depths of the human psyche, where truth slumbers that are of universal validity. Images that arise in this way from the depths of man's unconscious psyche in the forms of symbols are apt to have a truth which transcends human nature or intelligence. But we might still say these things were true and valid for the people who produced them. But why should we take them into serious consideration? The answer is that similar images arise today in the unconscious products of modern men and women. They are to be seen in artistic creation, pictures, poetry, drama, and also they are present in the dreams and fantasies of the ordinary individual who has no claim to artistic capacities. The sensible attitude would seem to be neither to credit nor to discredit the wisdom of the ancients, but instead to examine these myths with an open mind. If they do not appeal to us directly, they will convey no truth to us, and we may as well waste no further time upon them. But if they do speak to us, their strange, non-rational logic will carry its own conviction, and no rational proof of their truth will be necessary.